Thank you again, everyone, for joining. My name is Spencer McLean. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Accounts at Signified, which means I have the luxury of working with a lot of very large, well-known brands, many of them attending this webinar with me today. I've been with the company for about a year and a half, but I have about 10 years of experience in e-commerce fraud and risk across companies like Akata, MasterCard, Firo, and now Signified. Today, we'll be talking about the peak season and just spikes in volume in general. The holiday season is coming up. It might seem crazy to many of you that it's August and we're already talking about Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and Christmas. But the preparation that we do now will set us up for success when we are, at our busiest and our customers demand the best experience possible. But we also know that, fraud will ramp up during these peak seasons as fraudsters try to exploit vulnerabilities in the system. So what can we do now to prepare and be ready for what is effectively the Super Bowl for retailers? Today, we've put together a great panel with experts from Samsung, Sweetwater, Albertsons, and Domain that will share their expertise about how they prepare for the peak season across each of their businesses. One last note before we go into intros. Signified is running our annual 25 days of giveaways. As we kick off for the holidays this year, winners will receive products from Alo Yoga, Tatcha, and more. Keep an eye on your email to see if you win, and thank you again for participating. So let's dive into intros before jumping into the panel. Jace, will you go first?
Yes. Hey, everyone. I'm Jace. I'm the senior e-commerce strategist at Domain. I've spent the last 8 years in retail and e-commerce with a background in data and strategy. Here at Domain, we're a Shopify design and development practice, so helping brands kind of migrate, scale, and optimize their commerce operations across all of their channels. In my role, I focus on helping brands measure the true impact of their site and really help reduce risk in the funnel. So things like cart abandonment, bracketing, and preventable returns. And I can pass it over to Manoj.
Thank you, Jace. First of all, I'd like to thank Signified for having us. My name is Manoj Katel, Senior Manager in the risk team with Samsung. I've been with Samsung approximately for 8 months now. Prior to joining Samsung, I spent 11 years at an audiobook producer and retailer company, which was owned by Amazon. I gained diverse experience across various domains. I worked in various roles in data engineering to marketing to customer service, and then also in the fraud prevention space. And then I continued my career in the fraud prevention space at Samsung and bringing my technical and strategic insights to kind of help safeguard and our operations and enhance our fraud prevention measures. So regarding Samsung, just have four words for you: technological innovation for all. Samsung is a global leader in technology and innovation, renowned for its very diverse consumer electronics, semiconductors, and digital solutions. And pass it to Kotai.
Hi, thank you. My name is Kothai Senthil, and I lead payments at Albertsons. I've been at Albertsons for about 5 years now, leading payments, omnichannel payments, risk and fraud. I've been in payments overall for over 10 years now. Prior to Albertsons, I worked at Uber in payments there, and then prior to that, I worked at Capital One on the issuing side. So I've seen a decent amount of just issues on the payment side overall. At Albertsons specifically, we are a omnichannel retailer. We do about $80 billion in sales on an annual basis. The majority of that is retail, but we have a sizable multi-billion-dollar e-com business as well. And we tend to look at risk and payments holistically across both retail as well as e-com. We are obviously getting ready for the holiday season, and it's never too early to prep for that. So excited to be on this panel. And I will pass it along to David.
Thank you. My name is David Steinberg, work for a company called Sweetwater Sound. I've been at Sweetwater for approximately 6 years, and prior to coming to Sweetwater, had roles in data as a data analyst and then leadership roles there. Has then moved over to Sweetwater into IT roles, project management roles, IT leadership, and then actually kind of fell into the fraud game like so many other people do, right? To where I saw it as an opportunity and just a large project, really. And then once I sunk my teeth into it, I realized, okay, maybe we don't want to try to fully automate this thing completely. Like it's ever changing. There's so many different aspects to it. And so I've been in this role ever since. And Sweetwater Sound is a music and pro audio company. And we really specialize in musical expertise in our customer relationship. And I mean that in the sense of actually having relationships with our customers, getting to know our customers. So we have over 800 what we call sales engineers that are experts in their field that are assigned to customers that have conversations with them and help them choose not only the best gear, but then how do they use that in practice.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can focus on the panelists. And just a quick reminder for the audience, we are going to take Q&A at the end of this session. So anytime during the session, feel free to drop questions in the chat or the Q&A section of the chat, and we will field as many of those as possible before we wrap up here. So diving in, just general setting the scene. I'm just going to do a round robin question, and then we'll jump into topics that everyone can chime in on. First and foremost, Manoj, Samsung is known for global reach and premium products. How is Samsung blending fraud readiness and striving for higher approval rates to protect holiday sales or just general peak season best practices?
That's a great question. Thank you, Spencer. To blend fraud readiness with higher approval rates and protect holiday sales, we've implemented real-time monitoring, rule based on transaction patterns and behaviors. So we built a comprehensive fraud query that profiles orders using many attributes, enabling us to identify and mitigate potential risk. And additionally, we collaborate with Signified to enhance our fraud scanning capabilities as well. And we want to ensure that legitimate transactions are approved efficiently while also minimizing the risk of fraudulent activities. Thereby, like we safeguard our revenue during our peak holidays periods.
Mute that. Thank you, Manoj. Okay, David, building on Manoj's point. So Sweetwater is all about delivering the right gear on time. I horribly misquoted the size of your sales engineering team prior to you joining. And I think that's a really interesting part of your business. How do you maintain the famous service that you're known for, that your customers demand, while also optimizing for fraud prevention and conversion? And then furthermore, like how about driving operational efficiencies to help your team keep up with seasonal peaks?
Yeah, so that's a great question because it does seem like it is two opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Like we like to have relationships with our customers, but then how do we prevent fraud, especially when things scale up? So great question. I would say it comes back to knowing our customers, like truly knowing our customers, having those relationships with them. So as things progress, into the holiday season and order flow really starts coming in, we lean and leverage that relationship with those customers. So we know our customers, sure, in a as far as the data goes and so on and so forth, but we actually know what they're generally looking for. Are they looking to buy something for their kids or a coworker or so on and so forth? And since we have that knowledge, we'll partner with our sales team and leverage that relationship when it comes to fraud so that we have an idea of what they're going to be purchasing before they even purchase it. And we'll adjust our fraud rules accordingly. Now, we also get an influx, like many companies do, of new customers coming in during the holiday season or one-time buyers that are buying for a grandson or something along those lines. And so in order to keep operational efficiency, we'll partner. In fact, we partner with Signified specifically to take on more of that order flow, that volume, if you will, in helping us to determine which orders are higher risk, which orders are good, and even products like liability shift, for instance, right? Which allows us to say, hey, for whatever reason, we can't look at this right now. Signified, please take a look at this and make a decision on our behalf. And by the way, if you don't mind covering it, if you're wrong, that would be great too. So we will utilize those tools as well because it helps us to keep orders going through as quickly as possible and only stopping those that absolutely need to be stopped.
I think there's certainly some merit to thinking about a tech stack holistically and like what every piece of the tech stack, both in terms of internal operational tools, fraud prevention tools, and how do you have a holistic view of the customer. And we're going to get to domain in a minute. Jace, just a preview. We're going to jump to Katai first. But I think domain brings some interesting like perspectives on the conversion side of the funnel. So how do we make sure customers place good orders? But we'll get to that momentarily. Before then, Katai, grocery is a very different space than electronics, than luxury, than music instruments. Like I imagine that grocery has a different holiday shopping pattern than other large retailers. Can you talk about your shopping volumes and how that impacts both fraud, payments, returns, and abuse? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. If you think about your own grocery shopping, it's usually a pretty good example for what we see. Generally speaking, in the lead up to a holiday, whether it's Thanksgiving, whether it's Christmas, New Year's, or any holiday for that matter, that's when you do the bulk of your grocery shopping. And that's what we see as our volumes too, as peak volumes. We see a ton of volume in the week leading up to Thanksgiving or the few days leading up to Christmas, and same for New Year's. But we see next to no volume on the day after Thanksgiving and the day after Christmas and Cyber Monday and so on. So it's an interesting point in that our volumes are a little bit different than what other retailers would see, and that's true across grocery for the most part. There are certain things that we do every year to prepare for that lead up to these holidays. On the fraud side and on the payment side, we obviously make sure that our systems are up and running and we have reliability and redundancy and so on. When it comes to things like returns fraud and some of the things we're going to talk about, we do have models in place, and we have a very strong data science team that works collaboratively with retail operations and with ecom operations to make sure that the orders that are being decisioned and the orders that are being actioned are actually good orders that are going out. There are several models that we have that work in the background that look at customers, that look at the items that they're buying, that look at the geographies or the tenders that they're using. And all of that kind of comes together to decide what's a good order versus what's an order that we should potentially flag for manual review.
Excellent. And I would love for people in the audience, like if there are questions about like what you'll see on this panel is we have a set of large merchants that have a lot of resources. And Katai talks about the data science team that's able to really holistically understand the customer journey and make a decision ultimately. But if time allows, and if there's an interest, which you can express in the Q&A, I think diving into how we can implement some of these best practices, even for merchants that have more of a compression on resources internally. Maybe we can cover that later. But thank you, Katai. Finally, before we pivot to another line of conversation here, Jace, in the luxury space, like buyers are different. They expect white glove service, and they can be quick to abandon the shopping cart if the experience doesn't meet their expectations. Like, how does Domain work with your brands to optimize the checkout funnel, and how does all of this weave together?
Yeah. So you're right. For luxury buyers, the digital checkout has to feel just as seamless and intentional as it does in the in-store experience. So we really help brands streamline the funnel by simplifying their checkout steps and reducing some unnecessary fields. I'm really making sure that we have those key trust signals there, like delivery timelines and return assurances, making sure that everything is visible at the right moments. We also work with brands to surface, for example, loyalty perks or personalized offers. Those details really help kind of reduce that friction, reinforce the trust behind the brand, and keep those high value buyers from abandoning the cart.
Lovely. I think conversion, one thing I hear a lot from merchants is once you have fraud under control, quote unquote, because it's an ever evolving target, like merchants do tend to move resources more towards customer experience and optimizing every step of the checkout funnel. Could be a luxury, pun unintended, but yeah, I think that's really compelling. Okay, let's switch gears here. So we're gonna go to just questions that anyone in the group can tackle. So anyone that feels really compelled to dive in first, please do. Otherwise, just from an operational standpoint, I'll call on people one by one if we want to be a little bit more civil about it. So let's talk about payment methods. Obviously, the economy is, up and down. I'll leave it at that. When we think about the holiday season this year, Looking back to 2024, last year we saw a 15% increase in buy now, pay later. The majority of that came in the second half of calendar Q4. With this holiday season coming up and with tariffs and speculation about the economy, like we assume that consumers are going to be feeling squeezed. Spending might be down overall, but consumers might move to financing options like buy now, pay later, pay by bank, store financing. And so, how does the panel think about the checkout mix? Like, how do you adjust the checkout mix to attract the right buyers and get them to use the right payment methods? But also, maybe there's an education component to all of this to give customers, an understanding of what their options are. Does anyone feel compelled to go first? Otherwise, I think Jace, it could be a good segue into you because we talked about this one specifically.
Yeah, I can take the lead here. So you're right. The buy now, pay later is super prominent, and we're also kind of seeing it as table stakes. People know that it's available, and it's they have the option on any kind of site that they're on to kind of use those buy now, pay later flexibility options. For us, we don't think it has the need to dominate the product page, but it can kind of live in the checkout area instead. On the product page, the space is better used for some more conversion driving trust signals like the return assurances, the shipping promises, things like that. Payment flexibility is still very critical, but you kind of want to make sure that you prioritize and message the options appropriately. So yeah, I can pass it off to someone else if you want to jump in on that.
I can chime in a little bit. I think to capitalize on the buy now, pay later, I think we need to give our customers the convenience of any type of payment, right? So like Samsung has partnered with Affirm Financing and Klarna, ensuring we have a seamless integration into our checkout process. Samsung also has Samsung financing, so you apply and then you pay over time, and it's basically to provide a frictionless payment experience to our customers. So basically, by diversifying all of these payment solutions and align with the customer preferences, that's how I believe we can maximize our revenue while again delivering the convenience to our customers. Yeah.
Something else, you spoke about Affirm. We also partner with Affirm. We have our own in-house buy now, pay later as well. But you spoke about Affirm. One of the things, tying this back to kind of that operational efficiency and making checkout as smooth as possible. One of the things that Affirm does well that I appreciate is, they have some of their own, or not some, they have their own fraud team, and they're reviewing those buy now, pay later applications as they come in, even though they're making these instant decisions, to the point that if we see that the customer is purchasing via Affirm, it's not that we remove all fraud rules from it, right? But I'm saying we put more emphasis on trusting that order, because at the end of the day, Affirm will cover that, in a liability sort of way. If they okay or approve the order, by the time that it gets to us, they've already taken care of that, so we don't run them through as many fraud rules before we're able to push that out.
Yeah, and I'll just echo what some of the other folks on the call have said. It's in our benefit to try and meet the customer where they want to pay and how they want to pay. So it's very much in our interest to try and offer all of the payment methods that we potentially can. And as grocery stores, we take way more payment forms than I think most other retailers take. We take about 35 to 40 in our stores right now, currently, across both e-com and retail, but most of these are taken on the retail side. To echo what Jay said, though, we don't really allocate additional space on the payments area to pitching different payment forms. Instead, what we're trying to do is build trust with the customer, and we like to pitch things like the customer guarantee. We like to pitch easy refunds and things like that to make it more seamless of a customer experience. That being said, specific to buy now, pay later, we do accept buy now, pay later in our stores, but not directly. We haven't partnered with any of the companies that are mentioned or any of the other companies in the space. Instead, we take the debit cards that go and sit in your Apple Pay wallet or your Google Wallet or your Samsung Wallet, and we have noticed a material increase in that over the last several quarters.
Amazing. Manoj, did you have any last comments there, or should we move to the next question?
No, we can move to the next question.
Okay, great. So that was excellent. Thank you, everyone. What about like return abuse and return fraud? Like it's a hot topic. I don't know for anyone who attended MRC in Vegas this year, and I know the San Diego event's coming up. Returns abuse and return fraud is such a talking point for the audience. Like it's the next frontier in some ways of fraud prevention. And so, panel, how do you prepare for a potential surge in return fraud and return abuse during the peak seasons? And Manoj, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I think return. It's always tricky, right? After the post holidays and all these promotions that we, the promotion that goes on. But preparing for a surge in returns, I think it's involves like multiple steps. Like how do we combine like proactive monitoring, or how do we like profile the customers? I think the most important piece is like how do we profile the customer? How do we profile the order? We need to like understand what are all of the detailed attributes of the order and the customer, to really understand what's the customer behavior. Like it's I think the number one component to like understand, is it like fraud or is it abuse? And then if it's abuse, then we can place some policies around it. But if it's fraud, like how do we capture that? So, so I think really partnering with customer service, really understanding the voice of the customer, understanding like are they seeing something? Are they getting influx of calls? Like what can we do about it? Have we seen like trends in the previous years? Like I think some of those things are really critical, like really critical in terms of working with cross-functional teams in order to like understand what's happening.
Love it. It's all about data and understanding the data, like compelling. Katai, I'll go to you next. What do you have to add to this topic?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a topic of high interest internally. Like all the other retailers on the call and just across the industry, we've seen our share of returns abuse and returns fraud as well. For this holiday season, and just talking more generally about refunds abuse, we are in the process of tightening up the models that we have in the back end that are running that kind of highlight some of these abuse patterns. We are looking more closely at what customers are doing and more closely at what they're buying, and we're putting those two data sets together to try and extrapolate what exactly is a potentially fraudulent refund. Those data sets are being created right now and will hopefully be ready in the next few weeks, so they'll be ready in time for this holiday season. The other thing that I think is unique to Albertsons is we are omnichannel, so whatever you buy is essentially being filled by one of our stores. And the stores are usually they are honestly the first line of defense when it comes to refunds abuse. They can tell what the patterns are and the orders that they're fulfilling and the things that people are buying. And they will also see a lot of the refunds come back to the stores. There are folks that prefer to actually come into the stores to do their refunds, and they're that first line of defense that kind of says, okay, this is not a refund, this should be something else. So we're partnering across the organization with data science, with internally with the payments team, with retail operations, with the ecom team, to kind of get ahead of this problem before it mushrooms into something bigger.
I love the call out on omnichannel because it creates such a complex equation when it comes to the feedback loop. And how do you get good data from thousands, tens of thousands of people in your stores across the country? But let's table that for later. But that's really compelling. David, how about you? What do you have to add?
So going back to, we leverage those customer relationships really to help with that holiday or post-holiday surge in returns. So because we know our customers so well, if we understand, and we understand their history of returns and so on and so forth, if we have that history with a customer, we will streamline those returns, which is going to really help with any bottleneck returns process. And we'll trust the customers with what they're sending back and kind of verify, a little bit later. Whereas those first-time customers or those nearly brand new customers, those are the ones that we'll put more time into from our DC team, receiving that product back in and checking it in communication with our team and with the sales team, of checking those orders, getting them through and doing the full check right up front before necessarily offering that return. So that's how we utilize, our history with the customer and the customer relationship that we've built, up to and including, right, to where maybe there's always sometimes, confusion in that time of returns, to where you purchase something, you send it back in, you believe it should have been there already, maybe it's not, and there's some issues with the carriers. Well, our sales engineers are able to reach out and have a conversation with the customer like they normally would, that is able to offer a little bit of insight into the situation that otherwise, if you're just going off of data or you're just going off of a process that's built in, you may end up hurting that customer relationship. But here we're able to save it.
Love it. Jace, how about you?
Yeah, so we like to start by kind of reducing the root causes of returns. So, for example, if you are a clothing brand, making sure that you have those detailed sizing guides, the fabric information, even the social proof to kind of lower the bracketing. So, the buying of multiple things, just and a little bit of the buyer's remorse behind it as well. We really think that those transparent return policies also set the right expectations. So making sure, like Kotai said, that they're generous enough to kind of build the trust behind it, but also firm enough to make sure that we're discouraging abuse. Um, and just making sure, like we can help kind of distinguish between those loyal VIP from the more risky behaviors, so they can stay generous and really good customers without opening the door to fraud.
I think the concept of being able to classify what is an avoidable return is a really interesting one, because the more that we at Signified talk to merchants about this problem, the more we realize that like the labels, aka the outcomes of a return, like is it good or is it bad? Is it avoidable or is it not? There's a lot of gray area in that space. And I think that like the idea of, okay, well, during the checkout process, how do you make sure that like the customer knows what they're buying? And that's an easy, quote unquote, way to avoid some avoidable returns, if you will. Um, okay, let's move on. We're almost at the halfway point. Let's talk about anecdotes. So, anecdotes from the last peak season or last holiday period. You guys can choose. Manoj, I know you guys just had a sale, so maybe you'll take an anecdote from the recent product launch, maybe not. So here's the prompt. Um, can each of you share a real world example from the last holiday season or last peak season where there was some sort of situation or you implemented some sort of strategy around fraud prevention, payments, conversion optimization that had a direct and measurable impact? And I'll start with you, David. What do you got?
Yeah, so last year we were able to work with our data teams, our data team or data science team as well, to put together some essentially real-time models to measure the fraud risk. And we do a lot of different types of scoring. So the fraud risk of these orders coming in real time, so that we're able to see any shifts that happen to be occurring, that we can then focus our team's attention into to help discover, what the root cause is. Is it just something that's related to a promo that's going on? Or is it something where, hey, there's starting to be an increase in fraudulent orders coming from these particular IPs, and they happen to be scoring, let's just say, in what we would consider a high risk profile or a mid risk profile. And so by that partnership and doing that last year, we were able to save a considerable amount of fraud that would have either come through in credit card fraud from others that happen not to be customers, but their credit card information was stolen. And then, of course, the chargebacks that eventually will come with those. So, the figure specifically, not necessarily going to mention, but I would say that it absolutely saved in revenue in being able to do this real-time analysis.
Awesome. Manoj, you're unmuted, so you're next.
So we did something similar. We built a fraud query that does customer profiling, and this fraud query, I call it the fraud query because it consists of a lot of PII information. It has more than 30 attributes where we can look at the data, slice the data, and see where there's abnormalities. And then we also build a Tableau dashboard and slice and dice the data and trended the dashboard. So like on a day-to-day hourly basis, we can look at, okay, are there any spikes? Now, if there is, like, how do we run our fraud query, and then check on those orders to see if we can do some type of customer profiling or understand the behavior, so we can mitigate some of those, bad actors. So I think the key steps are to monitor, to analyze, and then look for patterns. As long as you do those three things, I think you're able to like identify, the and mitigate, the bad actor or the fraud.
Jace, how about you?
Yeah, so my example will be a little bit more focused on conversion optimization. And one brand we worked with last holiday kind of, noticed a higher than expected cart abandonment during checkout. So when we analyzed it, we found that, the users weren't necessarily seeing the delivery timelines in the way that they should have, especially during the holiday season. Users want, to see when they're going to be expecting their gifts. So we moved that messaging a little bit earlier in the funnel and kind of personalized the location so that users would know when their gifts would arrive. Before committing. So that kind of small change really led to a conversion lift. And this year we'll be implementing that across a few brands.
Can you speak to your A/B testing a little bit? When we were prepping, you were talking about how sophisticated
Yeah.
to implement that. Like, how do you test out these changes?
Yeah. So we do like to make it towards a custom audience. With our A/B testing, we partner with a few different toolings where we can kind of do a little bit of drag and drop or custom dev work to work through those types of programs and how much we want to allocate it. We also kind of think about, how many variants do we want to do? So we'll start with a hypothesis and think if we do this, then we believe that we'll have for example, a conversion lift. So once we work through those iterations and have some more statistically significant data, we can move forward with implementing that live on the site. And that is something that we did with this brand when we kind of tested moving the delivery timelines a little bit earlier in the funnel.
Yeah, I think there's just like such a parallel to like from conversion to fraud prevention and payments too. It's like, how do you test your hypothesis? Like when we roll out a new model at Signified, like that new model goes head to head against the current model. And if it's better, great, we roll it out. And if it's not, you don't. But you have to be really deliberate to get to a point where you can test these types of hypotheses in a sophisticated way. So thank you for sharing that, Jace.
Yeah.
Okay, Katai, what do you have? Real world anecdotes about last peak season.
Yeah, and I'll give you a real world example. One of the things that people buy during the holidays is gift cards. They're just a nice, easy gift, and it's a good last minute gift too. That being said, there's also a lot of fraud in gift cards, particularly in gift card sales. And we see a fair amount of that in our stores, in e-com and so on. In our stores, particularly last year, we observed different types and different formats of gift card fraud over the course of the year. Some of the things we like to do is we do like to look at chargebacks by the type of transaction, meaning is it what was the payment tender? And then also how was that transaction done? Was it a EMV transaction? Was it a swipe transaction? Was it a fallback transaction? Just what is the nature of that transaction? And we've created very robust data sets around gift cards particularly, and we can do real-time decisioning where we can look at the fraud rate for a certain store by a certain bin for a certain type of gift card that's being sold and either allow it or deny it at POS when the person is standing at checkout. So a lot of that came from things that happened last year, particularly around the holidays.
Yeah, super compelling. Thank you. Gift cards are honestly triggering for me in a way. It's like the closest thing to cash that fraudsters can get, except going after brands like MoneyGram and Western Union. So yeah, we see it as the number one fraud target, which makes sense. Okay. Ever ambitious. We are moving ahead. Let's touch briefly, however briefly we can, keyword, on false positives. So we talked about returns, we talk about checkout conversion, we talk about payment methods, but like one of the dirty secrets of the industry is like it's really hard to understand like are you declining good customers or not? Because that feedback loop, and I talked about feedback loops earlier, that feedback loop isn't really that clean. And so I'm going to start with Samsung because we work really closely together on false positives. And I think a couple of your teammates are here that are interested in this topic as well. How does Samsung go about false positives and making sure that the customers aren't insulted?
It's a great question. I think false positives are always tricky, right? I mean, um, uh, to your point, like Spencer, we constantly create that feedback loop to you to really understand what the signified model is doing in terms of false positive. Like, are we catching the good actors and the bad actors? I think that's, we heavily rely on Signify for that. But in terms of like false positive is how do we like a deep dive into those customers again, right? What is their past behavior? How can like thresholds be dynamically updated based on signified models? Do we like tighten them? Do we loosen them based on specific patterns or behaviors observed? It's at the end of the day, it's tricky. I mean, no merchant would have a false positive less than, I don't know, like it would never be zero. But I think working together collaboratively in terms of like data sharing and what are the patterns we're seeing, the trends, I think data itself it speaks for itself. It's like I mentioned earlier, right? The key component is we have to analyze the data, identify the patterns and common attributes between the orders, and then check the volume of orders, like velocity and frequency, like how are these customers buying them in bulk? Like, are they allowed to buy them in bulk? Then, if not, then we have some policy rules that runs in the background. But again, I think it's very tricky, but I think we're partnering with Signified to make it better. So that's what I can say.
So before I move on to Katai next, just one call out. The three ways that I've seen merchants track false positives are in order of accuracy. Um, One is call center feedback. So insulted customers, many of them, not all, but many of them will call in to the call center. And when we were talking earlier with Katai about the omni-channel components, the same challenges exist there around the operational efficiency, labeling, training, and certification, but call center feedback is something to do. The next level is um, manually reviewing declines. It can be expensive, but like we know a lot of merchants, and Manoj, like this is a place we partner around, okay, well, looking at the declined orders, how can you put a human on it to see did the model or the system or whatever decline inaccurately, and then use that as feedback loop. And then finally, the most sophisticated merchants, and this is an extremely expensive measure, but many merchants deploy control groups where they automatically approve a subset of their declines that they would have otherwise declined. And then they use that for the feedback loop. But imagine the level of fraud you can get from that. And like, can you carve out enough in your P&L to fund that type of behavior? Like very few merchants do it that way, but it's the most accurate measure, obviously. Anyways, bit of a tangent. I'm passionate about this topic. Katai, let's move to you next. False positives.
Yeah, no, I'll be honest, we don't do enough around false positives. That being said, I also don't think we have a huge problem on the false positive side. Not a lot of people come to grocery to perpetrate fraud. It's an industry, I think, where the false positive rate is pretty small to begin with. Out of the things you mentioned, Spencer, we do number one, we do call center feedback, but I'll be honest, it's not great feedback because it's dependent on the data that the call center agent is collecting. If they don't get the order ID, then we don't have a ton to go off by. We can take a look at some other information to see if we can triangulate what the actual order was to get some data around it. But we don't do two or three. For control groups, I don't think that's in our budget. I don't think it'll be in our budget in the foreseeable future. But we do okay with number one in terms of call center feedback, where we do take that data and we tie it back to our data sets to try and understand which of these orders should have actually gone through.
I think there's also a function of like how high is your approval rate and your authorization rate. In grocery, and not sharing any specific numbers, but just grocery in general, Like besides digital gift cards, and there are certain fraud targets within the grocery ecosystem, but fraud pressure is relatively low compared to brands like Samsung or Sweetwater or any of the luxury brands that Domain works with. And so you have to think about false positives in the lens of, okay, well, how much fraud pressure does your business experience? And it's kind of a dynamic moving target. Pivoting to David. David, you guys have a 700-person sales engineering team. And so how do you guys tackle false positives?
Yeah, so we will, since we, focus on the customer relationship so much, right? And that's where we make our bread and butter, if you will. We don't, obviously nobody does, but we don't want to upset our customers, especially somebody that's legitimate. And for whatever reason, we've decided to cancel them, right? Cancel their particular order. So any of those declines, and you mentioned it just a little bit ago, any of those declines, we will put a human on to look at that individually. And up to and including if we, whether it's automatically or with one of the members of our awesome fraud team, put eyes on something and we decide to cancel it, then we will still reach out to that customer's assigned sales engineer, give them a heads up that, hey, we've canceled this order because we're pretty positive it's fraudulent. They will then in turn reach out to their customer just to be sure. Now, is that an expensive model, if you will? Yeah, it is. However, we value that relationship so much that we'll take those additional steps in order to make sure that the customer is taken care of and that they actually attempted to place that order. And the feedback that we get overwhelmingly from the customers is, wow, no other companies that I know of are doing this. A lot of customers that are thankful. Yes, you do get the customers that are upset because their order was canceled, but you're proactively reaching out to them. You talked a little bit ago about monitoring the call centers for incoming calls from frustrated customers. Well, we take an approach, or at least we try to take that approach of proactively reaching out to them to solve that problem. And it usually results in one of two things. Either the customer is happy that we let them know that there was some sort of fraud going on and that they can reach out to their banks and take necessary measures to stop it. So they're either happy for that reason, or they're happy that we reached out to them because we did cancel their order and they just want to place the order and get it before Christmas.
That is such great service. Like if you have the luxury of being able to do that type of thing, like it's a best practice. I've heard of merchants that do this. I am shocked to hear it. Like how often when you pick up that phone and you call the customer, and like it's hard to scale that, obviously, but when you pick up the phone and call the customer, like how often, and this isn't a question, this is hypothetical, but how often are you informing those customers that they might be a victim of fraud, and then they can take measures on their end? To your point, I find it very compelling. Okay, let's change gears here. Let's talk about technology and innovation. I think that, and like, this is my personal opinion, like artificial intelligence is getting to a place where it's actually making a very big impact on the way businesses operate. We use it signified for a variety of things, which we won't get into on this call. But like a couple of years ago, when we were all playing around with ChatGPT and these AI tools to write emails, like they've come a long way. And I don't know if any of you plan on talking about your usage of AI, but if you do, I'm sure the audience will be appreciative of it. But thinking about technology and innovation in general, like how do you apply that to your businesses? And Jace, I'll start with you. How does Domain work with brands to innovate around the checkout conversion funnels?
Yeah. So for sure, we like to partner very closely with both the ecom team and the marketing teams, and any other kind of teams to, prioritize any on-site efforts before the holidays. So this is kind of where our A/B testing comes in. So we'll conduct like what we call it a growth council is, and dive really deep into all of the metrics, and kind of think of some ideas that might move the needle on whatever kind of metrics that they think might be best for them. So for example, AOV, conversion, return rate, reducing return rate, things of that nature. And we then like kind of map those findings against an impact and effort and a framework. So how much impact is it going to have in relation to the effort behind it? And we can kind of help build out a roadmap and prioritize for the peak season. And then from there, maybe identify any tests that are best for A/B testing. So we really like to kind of have that full funnel view of just making sure that we take those things, the ideas that are going to be most impactful and apply them before the peak season.
And I think going from like conversion optimization, when you think about the funnel, to payments, and then we'll go to fraud, like a logical next person to ask is Katai, because Katai, we talk about how many payment methods that grocery deploys. And as these digital and payment methods evolve, how is Albertsons adapting its systems to support diverse payment preferences while also maintaining fraud protection and customer trust?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We do support a lot of payments. That being said, we try to funnel people into the payment methods that we want them to use with things like incentives, with marketing, with cross offers on the loyalty side. So even though we accept 40, I would say there's a long tail of them, and most people probably use about 10 when they come into the stores, and even fewer when they come in on the e-com side. I would say that for this, we have a lot of crossover with loyalty, where we're trying to go after the same customers, and we're all after the same thing. We're trying to grow revenue with these customers, with the existing customers, and we're trying to get new customers in the door. For the new customers, we obviously want to meet them however they want to pay with us, whether it's with credit, debit, buy now, pay later, or something else. And when we work together with the loyalty and the marketing side, we can usually create offers that at least get them in the door. And once we get them in the door, then we look at these customers as existing customers and what do we need to do in order to grow that business. So we work closely with teams across Albertsons for marketing and loyalty to try and see if we can get these new customers in the door, observe their preferences and their spending habits, and then grow that business with them.
That's reminds me of something that Manoj and I worked on last year around the checkout funnel. So Manoj, I'll go to you next. I don't know if you'll build on Katai's point, but it reminded me of when we were looking at the checkout funnel in its totality, when we were talking about pre-authorization deployment of fraud prevention. But just broadly, like what tech or data partnerships made the biggest difference this year, and where are you investing moving forward?
Yeah, I think the partnership with the data engineering team has been the made a huge impact this year. It helped us gain a deeper understanding of our data architecture, including our tables and data sets available to us. It's just leveraging the right data sources to drive kind of like the informed decisions. Like I mentioned, we have a lot of PII data to profile the order of the customer. I mean, that data engineering really helped us, get that. So working closely with data engineering, and then us slicing and dicing the data to like get some valuable insights. And also use Tableau. I mean, Tableau was another tool that we leveraged this year that we didn't leverage last year, is to really monitor real time, really monitor our real time orders and see if there's any spikes in different SKUs or different spikes in different other products. Really slicing and dicing the data into Tableau itself as well. And then really looking at the key trends, right? From orders, from returns, where we're trying to also apply some anomaly detection, where it automatically gives us an alert. That's what we're planning to do in the second half of the year. We have not implemented that yet, but that's our second phase of the enhancement. And then it's at the end of the day, again, complex. There's a lot of data. It's complex, but how can you tell a story? How can you identify these customers is key. And then the data engineering team has really helped us kind of harness that power of data and technology, to for us to become successful into identifying, fraudulent orders.
I'm glad you mentioned the telling stories with data because I think that is what it comes down to. And it might be for any smaller merchants on the session, like it might be daunting to be like, okay, well, I'm not Samsung, I'm not Albertsons, I don't have all of these resources, and I don't have Tableau, and I can't do these things. But if you start small and you focus on, okay, well, I want to focus on fraud rates or payment authorization rates or whatever, like tackle one thing at a time and try to figure out what the data is telling you at the end of the day. And you'll quickly get into an exercise of, okay, well, there's signal and there's noise, and how do I maximize the signal versus the and minimize the noise? But like really understanding in an ever evolving environment of fraud pressure and payment mix changes and the economy and how does it affect our business. Like without data, like it's really hard to make good decisions from a strategy standpoint. But I digress. Okay, before we move to the wrap up here, David, all right, how about Sweetwater? What tech investments in the next 12 months do you think will be a game changer for you guys?
Great question. So our focus, my focus in particular, is really diving into agentic AI, right? And not just because, I oversee part of the payment side of things and then the fraud side of things. And so you're trying to walk that line between helpful conversions for customers, but also reducing and mitigating fraud, right? So when it comes to agentic AI, instead of trying to figure out necessarily how to stop it, looking first at how do we adapt to it and work with it as much as possible. Because at the end of the day, what it's going to come down to, and I'm simplifying it, of course, but is it not just a bot, but is it a good bot or a bad bot? Is it a bot that my customer knows about and has given us the A-OK to use, given us permission to charge payments, with this bot instead of them? And so it's really working with different companies to help understand, and different leaders in that area. I forget the gentleman's name. His last name's Nash from Experience. Spoke to him quite extensively about this because he's very, very deep in this topic. And if we can find a way to identify those good customers that are sending a bot on their behalf, then we're going to not only be able to ensure that order gets through, but that actually might help with some of the fraud prevention and making sure that just like we know the customer, we know the bot, right? So there's that piece of it. And a lot of that is going to be through web traffic. However, we do have this very big in-house sales team, right? And we already have seen AI calls being placed to our sales engineers. And I don't know if any of you on this webinar have seen it before, but you remember when AI first came out, ChatGPT, others, and they were generating images, and the humans, they couldn't seem to figure out humans because they always had, yeah, exactly. They either had 6 fingers or 2 wrists, or everybody has 2 wrists, I guess 3, 4 wrists, whatever it is, right? But 2 wrists on the same hand. It's funny in a way to hear these calls right now because they do certain things that tell you, okay, this is, although it sounds just like a human, their voice pattern or whatever just isn't quite right. And so slightly comical now. However, in 6 months, they're going to perfect it just like everything has happened with human hands now and AI generation. They're able to generate them without any flaws. So it's something that we're definitely investing the time, the focus, the energy into, and partnering with other companies to figure out, is it something that we need to partner truly with a company to do on our behalf? Or is it something that our awesome data science and engineering teams can put together for us?
That was excellent, David. And yes, most people have 2 wrists. Not everybody, but most. Okay. This has been great so far. Let's get to the wrap up, and I'm going to keep us on task here. Let's try to be quick and get to the Q&A. Last thing before the Q&A, quick round robin tips. Like, what's one takeaway you would give to the audience? Manoj, how about you go first?
I think, takeaway is again, really, just because I come from a data background, right? For me, it's all about slicing and dicing the data, play around with the data. How can we tell a story? How can we tell a narrative? How can we find anomalies? How can we find abnormalities, identifying trends and patterns, right? I think that's key. And also, like with this new, with implementing, I think implementing a real-time transaction monitoring system just by using advanced machine learning algorithms to detect and flag suspicious activities, automatically telling you that, hey, this is fraud, and this is not fraud. This is a good customer. This is not a good customer. I think that's where we wanna be. That's the future. And again, data tells the story, and if you know your data, then I think you're in a good place.
It's a great tip. Thank you. Jace, how about you next?
Yeah, I love everything Manoj said about, knowing your data, making sure that you are making informed decisions. Don't just try things just because, but To kind of build on that, I do think it would be best to make sure that you are using, your funnel real estate to highlight things that are going to be most valuable to the customer. So clarity and confidence, making sure that you are talking about delivery timelines and return policies and service guarantees, not just payment options, to kind of make sure that you have reduced abandonment and kind of build that customer confidence.
Love it. Katai?
Yeah, I'm just gonna echo what Jason Manoj said around data, and go one step further and say the dashboards are great and the layers that you create on top of the data are great. But if you can get even closer to the data by writing your own SQL, I would highly recommend that because there's a lot of color that comes out of just looking at the data on your own and kind of doing that analysis individually.
Learn SQL. There you go, audience. Take it. David, how about you?
I'll just say trust but verify. So all the data you can, of course, right? But verify it with the operation members of your team. So you cannot replace gut feel yet, anyway. And those individuals that have been doing the fraud work at the operational level, like putting eyes on orders for a number of years, there's something about that experience that they might be able to pick something out or notice a trend or notice something else that the data by itself isn't telling you. So trust your data, but before you go to move on it, verify with your team.
Thank you, everyone. Let's do a couple questions. We do have questions in the Q&A. We're going to start with one around loyalty. And Katai, you and I just talked about this last week, so I'm going to tap into you first. The question is, loyalty programs are a great way to get customers returning to shop with you instead of a competitor if all other things are equal. If you were guiding a company to launch a brand new loyalty program, what tips would the panel give this company for launching their new loyalty program to maximize the launch?
Yeah, the way I think about this is from a revenue perspective, meaning once you get the customer in the door, how much is that next dollar that customer spends with you worth? Next $100, next $1,000, whatever the metric is. And if you can think about the problem that way, because to get people back, every loyalty program costs a company something. When you look at Starbucks or Target or Albertsons or any company for that matter, there's a certain amount of money that companies put into that loyalty program. I would really encourage people to take a look at it from what is the incremental revenue worth to you? How much is that next dollar from that customer worth to you? How much are you willing to incent that customer to come back in through the door? And then from there, you can think about what makes the most sense for your brand and for your retailer. Is it things like partnering with someone else? With Starbucks, for example, they've gone and they've done partnerships with a whole host of different companies, meaning you go on Uber, you get a hotel room, you will eventually, you go on an airline, all of those points will come back and sit in your Starbucks account. So I would encourage you to think about it from that perspective.
Anyone else on the panel have anything to add about loyalty?
I can add something. I think it's also like, would you open the loyalty program for everyone, right? Like maybe we need to understand the LTV of the customer. Like maybe we open it up to customers who have, spent you know, some dollar amount in their lifetime and really like distribute that cohort and then open it to them maybe, right? So maybe so being in the marketing team in my previous roles, it really helped me like open up to like how do we differentiate the different cohorts that you really want to target, and I think that's important.
Um, any last burning comments about loyalty? If not, we're almost at the hour and I'm going to wrap us up.
I'll just very briefly add, don't always assume that, the first iteration of your loyalty program is going to be the best one. Just make sure that you're testing and learning, and I can leave it at that.
Thank you, Jace. Okay, we are almost at the hour. We did not get to a compelling question about resellers. Sorry about that, but I will volunteer the panel to like respond to the community. So if you want to ask questions of the panel, connect with them on LinkedIn, send them a note, ask them to pick their brain. The great thing about the fraud and payments and conversion community is like everyone's willing to learn from each other. But to wrap up, like we talked a lot about data, how to leverage it, how to think about signal to noise ratio, and like the value of SQL. Thank you, Katai. Understanding your customers, thinking about the funnel holistically, As a reminder, we are going to be doing our giveaway over the next 25 days or ramping up to the holiday season. So keep an eye out on your email. And thank you, everyone, for joining the session. Thank you to the panelists for participating. I think this was a great webinar. And with that, we'll wrap it up. Have a good day and a good rest of the week.